Welcome back to this series, guys, and if you're new here, welcome. This is the Ryu guide where we've worked all the way up from Iron Ranked, hopefully to Master. We are now in Platinum 4. We've gone one grade at a time. Bronze 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Silver 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's taken me ages, but we're nearly there. What we're introducing in this grade is another defensive mechanic. It's one we've talked about a bit. It's the parry. And I'm going to talk to you about the limited number of use cases for parry in these kind of intermediate ranks. Parry is just not something you should be using very often, especially perfect parry. I think when you get to master rank, then suddenly parry becomes a thing that you should be using all the time. I remember watching an MDZ Jimmy video where he went from sort of 1750 master rank points to 1850, 1900. And someone was like, "What's changed, Jimmy?" And he said, "Oh, I just have a parry button now." And it is quite important. There are a lot of ways to use it. But I think in these early grades, intermediate grades, there's just so much on your brain that adding another thing that requires you to pay attention to what your opponent is doing is not a good option. Just learn to block and learn to use the more default options against a lot of these tactics like drive impacting or using anti-airs. The other issue, or the other reason why I don't think parry is something to really worry about in these low grades, is that most of the things that parry is effective against, your opponents just won't be doing. Let's take a look at a few of those. So the first thing to note is that parry is not a good anti-air. I see people trying to use perfect parry as an anti-air all the time instead of just using Dragon Punch. All right, let's have a look at this. So I'm going to save here. Ryu's going to try to cross me up, which is a situation where you might be tempted to use parry. Right. I've got to put it on auto repeat. Right. Notice that I didn't get a punish counter there. Oh, I did get one there, right? Now this isn't particularly difficult. Like, I think you can practice this. But I'll tell you what you should practice instead. Well, let's look at how much damage I got. So first I have to land the perfect parry. And then I get 1160. What if I just do a Dragon Punch? 1320. And I get better Oki. Right? Right, now I think the Dragon Punch is almost always going to be a better option. And you might see me stuffing it up a bit there. But equally, if you stuff up a parry, bad things are going to happen. So I think it's much more worthwhile practicing your cross-cut Dragon Punches, which will be useful immensely throughout the game, rather than trying to anti-air with cross-cut. Rather than trying to anti-air with perfect parry. If you're playing a character that doesn't have good anti-airs, particularly a character that doesn't have good anti-airs against cross-ups, then it's worth having this perfect parry. And the main character I'm thinking of is Manon. So Manon's anti-air is good, but it doesn't stop cross-ups very well. And the other reason why perfect parrying with Manon is awesome is because it gives you a instant command throw that your opponent can't do anything about. So you get a free medal. But Ryu doesn't have to worry about any of this stuff. Ryu just got the Dragon Punch. You should always be just using the Dragon Punch, right? If they're in the air, take them out of the sky. All right, the second thing about perfect parry is that in Platinum grade and even in Diamond grade, most people don't know the frame data to use the main perfect parry application of Ryu, which is this one. I was too slow. Okay, now that is quite a nice application, and as I said in the previous video, if I was playing more with Ryu in Master, then I'd be practicing that a lot. But that's like such a high level mind game, right? That you're gonna be so reliably perfect parrying your opponent in that situation that they're gonna start to worry about pressing a button after your -3. Sometimes they're gonna throw you. You're just adding so many layers into a situation that is happening in a third of a second. That's too much for you to think about in Platinum. Don't worry about it. Just worry about moving backwards and hitting heavy punch. Or moving backwards and doing nothing. Or moving backwards and hitting solar plexus. And then every now and then, you can hit this if you think your opponent's mashing, just to blow them up. Alright. Another thing that means that perfect parry is not very useful down here is that people don't use auto-timed Oki. So one of the things that we've been talking about a lot throughout the grades, but I introduced it in one of the earliest videos, is this kind of Oki setup where you just press the heavy punch whenever you can and you'll get it auto-timed so that it always hits on the last possible frame and you're always +5 and you're always super meaty. So the person is waking up into your button being in their face. You're not timing it yourself. It's always got the same timing. And it's always the first frame that your opponent wakes up. Now, the weakness of these kind of setups is that they are relatively easy to perfect parry because there's a kind of auto time on the perfect parry. You can't just hold down parry as you're waking up. You have to press perfect parry at the right time. But at least there's a kind of very clear visual cue that you just press parry on your first active frame, then you will definitely get the perfect parry. So let's have a look at that. I've got a setup where Ryu knocks me down and then goes into that Oki. Let's try that again. Yep. All right, now, that is pretty powerful, being able to get those perfect parries. But let's talk about the counterfactual. Like, I've been practicing that a little bit before this video, and I only got it there 30% of the time. If I get it, then I swing 1200 damage into Ryu or something like that, and I gain the momentum. If I don't get it, then best case scenario, Ryu does a block string into me, and I just build back some gauge. But worst scenario, Ryu just throws me. And people are throwing all the time in all the grades, and then you take a lot of damage. Whereas if you just blocked, you would take less damage. You'd still block the heavy punch, you'd still block the block string, and you'd be fine. And I think in these lower grades where people aren't using these kind of auto-timed block strings, I don't think I've ever seen a Ryu do that drive rush into heavy punch thing against me. I do it all the time. I think it's like the most busted thing. But I don't think anyone did that to me in my climb to master. And that means that it's just harder for you to get the timing on the perfect parry because your opponent's timing is so varied as well. And a lot of people just like won't even do wake up pressure on you, and they'll be drive rushing at you, but then they'll press something like this late, or they'll be going for this, which is really late. So anyway, I just don't think this is a particularly good use for perfect parry in the low grades either. All right, so the final situation that we want to talk about is that most of the buttons or most of the moves that you would use perfect parry for in the advanced grades, because advanced players make those moves unpredictable, and so you can't get the drive impact out in time. In these lower grades, you can just get the drive impact out in time because people are less predictable. So I'm thinking of things like Kami's spin knuckle, or Ken's dragon lash, or this move, the heavy donkey kick. So in the higher grades, you might often use parry against this, and people also parry drive impacts because it gets you a lot of gauge back, and then you can still drive impact your opponent. And that's pretty cool. Like, I would be tempted to learn drive impact parries now that I'm in master, because it's kind of a universal skill. Like, I want to use other characters, and being able to perfect parry drive impact is universal across all those characters. But don't worry about that for you guys. For you in Platinum, just when they do drive impact, you do drive impact, okay? And that's more than enough. You don't need to optimize everything to the nth degree. You need to be able to play solid and get decent cash outs. So when people are dragon lashing you as Ken, they'll just be dragon lashing all the time, and you'll be able to recognize that because most players down in these levels only have one pattern that they do on repeat, maybe 3 moves that they do on repeat. So once you realize that this guy loves the dragon lash, then you just look for it and hit DI. Right, the same way that I can notice that this Ryu loves to hit donkey kicks, and I'll just drive impact him. Right. The other day in my little grind up with Dowsim, I was playing against a Luke down in the low grades who was just doing target combo into heavy knuckle, as we talked about in the bronze 5 video, and I was drive impacting him into paste. All right. So I think keep it simple is my main point about perfect parry. Now, there are some use cases of perfect parry that we should talk about. All right, let's have a look. Some of these are things that we have already talked about in previous videos. So Honda's headbutt is a move that you should be trying to perfect parry, because if you block it, you lose a whole bar. And Honda is still +3, or you're +3, he's only -3, but he's quite close to you, so you can't really punish him. Right? Whereas if you parry, then it's the same situation, but at least you haven't lost that whole bar of drive gauge. But what you really do want to try to do is get the perfect parry, but that means that you're going to do it late. So you'll get hit more often. Alright, so I would be tempted to just get in the habit of regular parrying. And every now and then you'll be late and you'll get a perfect parry. That's one use case. The other use case then is of course Blanca's ball, which we've talked about before. And the reason why perfect parry really doesn't matter here is because he still flies so far away from you. So really you just need to get this parry so that instead of blocking and losing a whole bar of drive gauge, you get the parry and you don't lose that whole bar of drive gauge. Because even off the perfect parry, you need to be able to drive rush behind it, and that's not very easy. So I'm not getting it here, am I? Well, it's something like that. It's really complicated. Alright, so we don't need to worry about perfect parry against Blanca either. So another use case that we have talked about is Yuri's pressure strings, because they're quite predictable. And then you can get a perfect parry and turn the momentum around on her. And you can start just blocking and then try to get the parry out later. Now note that I'm not holding parry here, I'm pressing it every time she comes through. And this is a relevant use case, and this is one that we're going to be talking about more over the next few minutes, which is that if some characters have these sort of really brainless pressure strings that are always the same, that means that it's pretty easy to kind of get your timing down. Right? And even when you don't get the timing right, at least you get your drive gauge back, which is actually the main reason to integrate parry into your game that we're going to be talking about. So let's talk about that for a second. So if I let Yuri just come in and hit me with all this pressure, then I'm going to lose a lot of gauge, and she's going to build back most of the gauge that it cost her to drive rush in. Let's have a look. Watch the drive gauges. Right, so I had lost almost 1.5 gauge, and she had built back nearly 2/3, I guess, of the gauge that she had lost. Let's have another look. So I've lost a bar, she's almost back to full bar, right? And I just took all this pressure. Whereas if I parry, then she doesn't take off any of my gauge. She still gets her store. She's still in front of me. The situation's not great, but at least I didn't lose all my gauge. We're back at normal here. And then occasionally, you will get the perfect parry and you'll shut her down. And that at least forces them to think about whether they want to stop this block string a little bit earlier and try to throw you. Alright? Now, what are some other circumstances or other characters that have these kind of brain dead block strings that we can talk about? So one of them is Ken. Because you know that Kens love this sequence. But I generally think that even against Ken, you're better off just doing your fuzzy guard, because it's less to think about, right? And you also, if you see that someone is playing Ken and they always go into the follow-up to Jinrai kicks, then you know that your real option is going to be... Why isn't my drive impact coming out? There we go. Yeah. Boom. Alright, that's going to be generally more effective at your level. I don't really see Ken starting to do fake Jinrai kick sequences until quite a bit later. But maybe by high platinum they're doing it already. But the first thing to do is when you notice someone Jinrai kicking a lot, just let them know that you can beat that with a drive impact and force them to play their game a little bit differently. Alright, here's another one, Kami. How often does this happen? Right, so this is a pretty obvious block string, and we should just be putting the parry out occasionally. When we see that the block string is just continuing, just put down the parry button. And that way we can build back our gauge. The main thing here, I mean, this is a light block string, so it doesn't really take off a lot of gauge anyway. But the idea is just to always be conserving our drive gauge because it's the most important resource in the game. Right? But I'm not getting my timings right. So this is harder than it looks, to be honest, because the gap in her sequence is thin. So if you do get the parry out, the likelihood of you getting a perfect parry is pretty high. But if you get it at the wrong time, then you're just going to be not holding block properly. Alright, so always be holding block while you parry. And then you'll be able to also have a chance to parry. Now you don't want to hold the parry after she does her first jab, because that's when she's going to be tick throwing a lot. Right? But just generally holding block and getting a parry out is a nice way to, instead of blocking all the time, to also get some parries, and then every now and then you'll get that nice sequence there. So Bisons love this one. Yeah, and so if you block that, oops. Then you can get some useful situations, right? And generally Bison is wailing on your drive gauge. So it's quite important that you block Bison, because otherwise you're going to get hit. Look at how that took half a gauge of damage for an overhead. This character's busted, bro, I'm telling you. So if we just hold down parry in some of these situations while blocking, then we're going to stop him from doing quite as much nonsense. And we're also going to be able to get perfect parries occasionally. Oh, my timing was way off there. There we go. Alright, and that's fine. So we're shutting, even if we don't get the perfect parry, just using the parry to help our drive gauge stay plump in these matchups is really quite important. And so I think that's more what you should be integrating parry into your game for at this point, is that if someone's using a lot of these brain dead pressure strings, just hold block and also be pressing parry in those block strings, and then you'll build your gauge back without changing your block stun situation, and you'll also get the opportunity to occasionally get perfect parries. Have a go at trying to get perfect parries just so you learn it, because it's not the timing on it, you have to be really late and you have to sort of wait till their fist is like about to make contact with you, and it does take a little bit of getting used to, but once you're used to it, I don't actually think it's like that hard, so it's worth practicing. The last use case that I want to talk about is blocking supers, particularly wake up supers. So because supers have the freeze screen animation, where you can input parry during the freeze screen, it's really easy to get a parry off against a super instead of just blocking it. So here I've got Bison set to wake up with his level 1. So after I knock him down, I'm going to act as though I'm shimmying him, right? But I won't press parry until during the super animation. Right? And then we can get a parry. Right? Because the parry buffers during the super. Right? And it's much better there to get the parry because then we don't take chip damage from his super. So let's see if I just block his super. Right, it didn't do a whole lot. But in these situations where I'm drive rushing in, often I'm going to be down some bar. So it's nice to be able to parry instead. And then we just follow up as usual with our punish. And there are a lot of supers where you'll be able to do this. You can't do it against uppercuts, because uppercuts come out automatically. There's no screen freeze to indicate that the super's happening. So I think that's worth practicing. Like, load up your usual practice drills where you're practicing your Oki sequences, like this sort of thing, and occasionally having to get supered in the face by a character like Marisa or Bison, who don't have invincible uppercut reversals, and so they use supers for reversals instead, and just try and practice this in those situations, because it is like a worthwhile optimization to add into your arsenal. Alright, I hope that has been a useful video about parries. So as I said, basically, I don't think you should bother with perfect parry until you get to master level. The only exception is Honda's head slam, pretty much. Parry is not good as an anti-air, you just want to do DP. Parry is not good for kind of sneaky setups, because your opponent won't realize that they're in a sneaky setup. Parry is not good as a wake-up option, because your opponents aren't doing easy wake-up Oki. They are going to be doing all sorts of weird stuff on Oki that is going to confuse you. You mostly just want to be blocking on wake-up. Even the delay tech is not really particularly necessary on wake up, just block. And people's buttons are very predictable, and so you can usually just use DI against them rather than using perfect parry. The times you do want to integrate parry into your game are when people are doing big block strings, and then you just want to hold block and occasionally tap that parry button, and that way you'll be able to recover your drive gauge, occasionally get perfect parries without really exposing yourself to big throws or anything like that. And then you also want to try to integrate parry against super, especially on wake up. All right, good luck, and I'll see you in Platinum 5.